As I lay dying in my room, my sister quietly left the door ajar for a stranger to walk in. I couldn't move. I heard footsteps. And her whisper, "Just make it look natural." But what happened next, who stepped into that doorway, changed everything. The fever had consumed me for 3 days. Pneumonia, the doctor said, but complicated by an autoimmune disorder nobody could quite name. My body felt like lead against the mattress, every breath a calculated effort. The medication kept me in this twilight state where consciousness flickered like a dying bulb. I was 32 years old and living in my childhood bedroom again after a brutal divorce left me financially devastated. My older sister Natasha had moved back home 2 years earlier with her husband Kevin Bennett and their twin boys, Parker and Mason, who were 7. Our parents, Linda and Robert, had welcomed us both back to the sprawling colonial house in suburban Massachusetts without hesitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Growing up, Natasha had been the golden child. Straight A's, prom queen, married her high school sweetheart. I was the rebellious one who moved to California, married an artist, and came crawling back when it all fell apart. Our mother never said it outright, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes every time she looked at me. That Thursday afternoon, I heard voices through my half-sleep. The medication made everything sound underwater, distant and warped. My door wasn't fully closed. Through my barely open eyes, I saw Natasha's silhouette in the hallway. "She's been like this for days." Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. A male voice responded, low and unfamiliar. "And you're certain about the timeline?" "The doctor said it could go either way. Her immune system is shot. If something were to happen naturally, nobody would question it." My heart tried to accelerate, but my body wouldn't respond. The paralysis from the medication held me captive in my own skin. I couldn't move, couldn't call out, couldn't do anything but listen. "Just make it look natural," Natasha whispered. Footsteps approached my room. Heavy, deliberate. Male. The door creaked wider. I forced my eyes to stay in that barely open position, praying whoever it was would think I was unconscious. Through my lashes, I saw him enter. Tall, mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit. He carried a small black bag. Then another figure appeared in the doorway. My mother. "Natasha, what on earth are you doing?" Linda's voice was sharp, cutting through the fog in my brain. The man in the suit froze. Natasha stepped into view, her face pale. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain why you're standing outside your sister's room with our insurance agent discussing her death like it's already happened?" Insurance agent. The words penetrated my consciousness like shards of ice. I'd taken out a large policy 5 years ago when I got married, naming Natasha as my beneficiary since I had no children. I'd never changed it after the divorce. "She's going to die anyway." Natasha's voice turned cold, calculated. "Why shouldn't we benefit? Do you know how much debt Kevin and I have? The boys need braces, college funds. This house needs a new roof. She's wasting away in there with no husband, no kids, no purpose." "Gab." Linda's voice shook. "Get out of my house right now." "This is my house too. I've been living here, helping you and Dad while she's been useless for months. Your sister is sick. She's not dead. And you're standing here planning her murder." The insurance agent cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morrison, I should clarify. I came here because Mrs. Bennett called me asking about accelerated death benefit riders and what would trigger a payout. I had no idea she was planning anything nefarious. I thought this was a standard inquiry about a terminally ill family member." "She's not terminal," Linda snapped. "Leave. Now. Before I call the police." He didn't need to be told twice. His footsteps retreated rapidly down the stairs. The front door slammed. Natasha stood her ground. "You're going to choose her over me? After everything I've done for this family? You were plotting to kill your sister for insurance money. There's no choice to make. Pack your things. You have until tomorrow morning." I heard Natasha's sharp intake of breath, then her footsteps storming toward the bedroom she shared with Kevin. Doors slammed. Raised voices echoed through the walls. Kevin's confused protests mixed with Natasha's angry justifications. Linda came into my room. Her cool hand touched my forehead. "Sweetheart, if you can hear me, you're safe now. I've got you." I managed the smallest squeeze of her hand. Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes. "Oh my God, you're awake. You heard everything." She sat on the edge of my bed, her own tears falling. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of this." Over the next hour, I drifted in and out while chaos unfolded around me. Kevin was apparently genuinely shocked by his wife's scheme. I heard him arguing with Natasha, his voice a mix of horror and disbelief. The words sociopath and monster floated up the stairs. By evening, my father had returned from his business trip. Linda filled him in, and his booming voice shook the house. Robert had always been mild-mannered, but his rage at Natasha's betrayal was something I'd never witnessed. He gave her 2 hours to pack and leave. Through my window, I watched them load their SUV in the driveway. Kevin looked broken, the twins confused and crying. Natasha moved with rigid fury, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. She never once looked up at my window. The fever broke that night. My body finally began responding to the antibiotics. Within 48 hours, I could sit up. Within a week, I could walk without assistance. The autoimmune flare that had nearly killed me gradually subsided under aggressive treatment from a specialist my parents drove me to see in Boston. My recovery was slow and painful. The pneumonia had ravaged my lungs, leaving me winded after the shortest walks. Physical therapy became my daily routine. I'd shuffle down the hallway with my mother's hand on my elbow, my father hovering nearby with a wheelchair in case I needed to rest. Each small victory felt monumental. Making it to the bathroom alone. Walking down the stairs without stopping halfway. Taking a full breath without my chest aching. The specialist, Dr. Victoria Ashford, had finally identified my condition as a rare form of lupus that primarily affected my respiratory system. With the right combination of immunosuppressants and targeted therapy, my body began to heal. It wasn't unnamed or mysterious as the initial doctors had thought. It just required someone with expertise in complex autoimmune conditions to recognize the specific pattern of symptoms. During those long days of recovery, I had nothing but time to think. About Natasha. About what she planned. About how close I'd come to dying, not from illness, but from my own sister's hand. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. We'd shared a room until I was 12. She taught me how to braid my hair. We'd stayed up late talking about our dreams, our futures, the families we'd have someday. When had it all gone wrong? I traced back through our lives, looking for the moment she'd changed. High school, maybe, when the competition between us intensified. I'd gotten into Yale while she'd gone to a state school. She'd seemed happy for me then, but maybe resentment had been building even back then. Or during my wedding, when my now ex-husband had spent more money on one day than Natasha and Kevin had spent on their entire modest ceremony. She'd made a comment about it being excessive, but I'd brushed it off as typical sibling ribbing. My divorce had been brutal. 3 years of marriage dissolved in 6 months of legal warfare. My ex, Tyler, had been a charming sociopath who'd hidden assets, racked up debt in my name, and gaslit me into thinking I was losing my mind. When I'd finally gotten out, I was emotionally destroyed and financially ruined. Credit cards maxed out. Savings depleted. Nowhere to go but home. Natasha had seemed sympathetic at first. She'd bring me tea, sit with me while I cried, listen to me process the trauma. But looking back now, I could see the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't offering comfort. She was assessing my weakness, determining how vulnerable I was. The illness had hit me 6 months after I moved home. At first, doctors thought it was just stress manifesting physically. Fatigue, joint pain, recurring infections. Then came the pneumonia, and suddenly I was bedridden, completely dependent on my family for everything. Natasha had volunteered to be my primary caretaker while our parents worked. She'd bring me meals, help me to the bathroom, administer my medications. I'd been sick for nearly 2 months before the critical fever hit. Those 8 weeks of slowly declining health, of treatments that didn't quite work, of feeling weaker each day. Now I wondered if she'd been tampering with those medications from the very beginning. Skipping doses to weaken me further. The doctors had been puzzled by how slowly I was responding to treatment. They'd increased dosages, changed antibiotics, run test after test trying to understand why my body wasn't fighting back. Had Natasha been sabotaging my recovery all along? I mentioned this concern to my mother during one of my physical therapy sessions. Linda's face went pale. She made a phone call immediately to my doctor, Dr. Harrison, explaining the situation. He ordered new blood work to check for any unusual compounds in my system. The results came back inconclusive, but he did find that my medication levels had been inconsistent, suggesting irregular dosing. It's possible she was manipulating your treatment, Dr. Harrison said during a follow-up appointment. The pattern suggests someone was either withholding doses or administering them at incorrect times. With your compromised immune system, that kind of interference could have been fatal. The confirmation sent chills down my spine. Natasha hadn't just planned to kill me. She'd been actively trying to weaken me, to make her eventual actions seem like a natural progression of my illness. How long had she been at this? Weeks? Months? My father hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Maureen Clark. Maureen was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and thorough. She started digging into Natasha's activities over the past year. What she uncovered was disturbing. Natasha had taken out 3 credit cards in Kevin's name without his knowledge, maxing them out on luxury items and expensive dinners at restaurants they supposedly couldn't afford. She'd been gambling online, losing thousands of dollars her husband didn't know existed. She'd borrowed money from friends under false pretenses, claiming various emergencies that never happened. Her financial situation was far worse than anyone had realized. Kevin had been completely in the dark. He worked long hours as an engineer, trusting his wife to manage their household finances. When Maureen showed him the evidence, he'd broken down completely. The man I'd known as my jovial brother-in-law turned into a hollow shell, realizing he'd been living with a stranger. "She told me your insurance policy was worth $500,000, Kevin confessed to me one afternoon, sitting in our parents' living room with his head in his hands. "She said if anything happened to you, we'd be able to pay off our debt and start fresh." I thought it was just a morbid observation, the kind of thing people say without thinking. I never imagined she was planning it. "How much debt are we talking about?" I asked gently. "$250,000, maybe more. I don't even know the full extent. She's been hiding statements, lying about bills. Our house is 3 months behind on the mortgage. The boys' school tuition hasn't been paid since September. I thought we were managing okay on my salary, but she's been bleeding us dry and I was too trusting to notice. The twins had been pulled from their private school as a result. Parker had cried for days, missing his friends and his teachers. Mason had started having nightmares, sensing the tension even if he didn't understand the cause. Kevin's parents offered to help financially, but Kevin was too ashamed to accept. His pride was destroyed along with his marriage. Maureen also uncovered Natasha's affair. She'd been seeing a personal trainer named Blake for 6 months, meeting him at hotels while Kevin was at work and the twins were at school. Blake had no idea she was married with children. She told him she was a divorced pharmaceutical sales rep with no kids, free to jet off with him on weekend trips she'd supposedly paid for with her commission checks. The hotel receipts, the text messages Maureen recovered from Natasha's cloud backup, the photos posted on Blake's social media accounts, all painted a picture of a woman living a double life. She'd been spending money she didn't have, lying to everyone around her, and growing increasingly desperate as her house of cards threatened to collapse. My life insurance policy must have seemed like the perfect solution. One sister, already sick and struggling, with no spouse or children to leave behind. A tragic death from complications of an illness already documented by multiple doctors. A grief-stricken family receiving a payout that would solve all of Natasha's problems. Except she'd underestimated our mother's intuition and overestimated her own cleverness. During my 3rd week of recovery, Natasha tried to contact my parents. Linda's phone rang at breakfast, and we all froze when her name appeared on the screen. My mother declined the call. Natasha tried again an hour later. Then again. Then she started texting. "I need to explain. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I wasn't thinking clearly. I would never have actually gone through with it. It was just talk, just stress talking. Please let me see the boys. Please." Linda showed me the messages. Each one was more desperate than the last, oscillating between self-pity and attempts at manipulation. She claimed she was the real victim here, driven to desperation by circumstances beyond her control. She blamed Kevin for not making enough money. She blamed me for being a burden on the family. She blamed our parents for not helping her more financially. Everyone was at fault except Natasha herself. Kevin blocked her number after she sent him a particularly vicious message accusing him of turning their sons against her. She claimed he was poisoning them with lies, that she was their mother and deserved their love and respect regardless of what had happened. The fact that Parker had explicitly told his father he was scared of mommy now apparently didn't factor into her reasoning. My physical strength gradually returned, but the psychological toll was immense. I started having panic attacks, especially at night. Every creak of the house sent my heart racing. I couldn't sleep with my door closed, yet leaving it open made me vulnerable. I'd lie awake imagining footsteps in the hallway, imagining Natasha finding a way back into the house, finishing what she'd started. My mother found me one night at 3 a.m, sitting at the kitchen table with all the lights on, clutching a baseball bat. I was shaking so hard the bat rattled against the table. Linda didn't say anything, just sat down next to me and held my hand until sunrise. "We're getting you a therapist," she said quietly as dawn broke. "Someone who specializes in trauma. This can't continue." Dr. Sarah Brennan became my lifeline. She specialized in PTSD from interpersonal violence and family betrayal. Our sessions were intense, forcing me to confront not just what Natasha had done, but all the ways our relationship had been toxic long before she tried to kill me. The competition, the comparisons, the subtle put-downs disguised as sisterly concern. I'd been conditioned to see Natasha as the good daughter, the successful one, while I was the disappointment. Even when she was plotting my murder, part of me had still been seeking her approval. Dr. Brennan helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. My illness, my vulnerability, my trust in family, none of it justified what Natasha had done. She helped me process the grief too, because I was mourning. Mourning the sister I thought I had, the relationship I believed we shared, the family unit that was now irrevocably shattered. During my recovery, the full picture emerged. Kevin filed for divorce immediately, getting emergency custody of the twins. He'd recorded his confrontation with Natasha on his phone, including her admission that she'd been researching ways to help along my death. Smothering with a pillow. Medication overdoses. Even researching poisons that could mimic natural complications from pneumonia. My mother had suspected something was wrong for weeks. She'd noticed Natasha checking on me too frequently, asking the doctors pointed questions about my prognosis and whether stress could worsen my condition. Little comments about my life insurance policy. Subtle suggestions that maybe I'd be better off not suffering anymore. Linda had installed a nanny cam in the hallway after catching Natasha standing outside my room one night with a strange expression on her face. She'd been reviewing the footage when she saw Natasha meet with the insurance agent in the driveway, then invite him inside while our parents were supposedly out. Linda had rushed home, arriving just in time. My mother also explained why there was audio. She'd set up an old baby monitor from when the twins were infants, one she'd kept in storage. With the twins now 7 years old, the device had been sitting unused in the attic until my illness. Linda had placed the transmitter in my room so she could hear if I called out for help during the night while she was in the master bedroom down the hall. That monitor had captured Natasha's whispered conversations outside my door, including the chilling phrase, "Just make it look natural." The police initially declined to press charges. Natasha hadn't actually done anything except talk about it. No concrete action had been taken. The insurance agent corroborated that she'd only asked questions, however suspicious. Her lawyer argued it was all a misunderstanding, stress from financial pressure, hypothetical conversations taken out of context. The insurance agent, Gerald Matthews, had his own story to tell. During his deposition, he explained that Natasha had initially contacted him claiming I was terminal with only weeks to live. She described a dire prognosis that didn't match my actual medical records. When he'd asked for documentation, she'd become evasive, saying the doctors were still finalizing the diagnosis. He'd agreed to come to the house because she'd been so insistent, claiming her sister was too weak to come to his office and the family needed to understand their options immediately. He'd realized something was wrong when he arrived and overheard Linda's confrontation, which was why he'd left so quickly and cooperated fully with authorities afterward. But I wasn't going to let her walk away. I hired a lawyer named Gregory Whitmore, a bulldog of an attorney who specialized in cases of attempted harm and estate manipulation. We filed a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to commit murder, and financial exploitation. The burden of proof was lower in civil court. Kevin agreed to testify. He provided his recording and detailed notes he'd made after their fight, including Natasha's confession that she'd been planning this for months. She'd apparently told him she was just preparing for the inevitable and couldn't understand why he was so upset about being practical. The nanny cam footage was damning. It showed Natasha bringing the insurance agent into the house, the two of them standing outside my room discussing my condition. Audio captured through my baby monitor, which Linda had moved to my room to listen for signs of distress, caught even more. Natasha asking the agent how quickly claims were processed. Whether an autopsy would be required for someone who died of natural complications from a documented illness. We also subpoenaed her computer. The search history made my blood run cold. How to cause respiratory failure. Undetectable ways to stop breathing. Do they autopsy pneumonia deaths? How long does smothering take? Pillow suffocation signs. She deleted it all, but Gregory's forensic expert recovered everything. The civil trial took 8 months to reach court. By then, I was fully recovered, back to work at the marketing firm where I'd managed to keep my job despite my extended medical leave. My boss, Patricia, had been incredibly understanding, especially after I explained what had happened. During those 8 months, I methodically built my case. Gregory had advised me to document everything, so I started keeping a detailed journal. Every memory that surfaced about Natasha's past behavior, every incident that now seemed suspicious in hindsight, every conversation where she'd casually mentioned my insurance policy or my failing health. The journal filled 3 notebooks by the time we went to trial. I also reached out to old friends and family members, asking them about their experiences with Natasha. The stories that emerged were chilling. My cousin Angela remembered Natasha asking detailed questions about Angela's inheritance from their grandmother, including whether Angela had updated her will and who her beneficiaries were. This was right after Angela had been diagnosed with lupus. My college roommate, Veronica, recalled a strange conversation where Natasha had asked if I'd ever mentioned wanting to die, if I'd seemed depressed or suicidal. Veronica had thought it was concern for a troubled sister, but now the questions felt more sinister. Had Natasha been trying to plant seeds, to establish a narrative where my death might be ruled as suicide? My ex-husband Tyler, despite everything that had happened between us, agreed to give a deposition. He testified that Natasha had contacted him during our divorce, asking pointed questions about my mental state, my medication, whether I'd ever expressed thoughts of self-harm. At the time, Tyler had thought she was gathering ammunition to use in the divorce proceedings, perhaps to paint me as unstable. Now we both understood she'd been researching, planning, laying groundwork for my eventual demise. The discovery phase of the trial revealed even more damning evidence. Natasha's laptop showed she'd been researching my autoimmune condition extensively. Not to understand it or help me, but to learn its weaknesses. She'd joined online support groups for people with similar conditions, asking anonymous questions about what complications were most common, what symptoms doctors wouldn't question, what would cause a sudden fatal decline. She'd also researched inheritance law, specifically looking into what happened to life insurance policies when the insured died without a spouse or children. She'd read articles about cases where family members had been suspected of murder for insurance money, studying them like textbooks to learn what mistakes to avoid. One particularly disturbing browser history entry showed she'd searched for famous unsolved murders that looked like natural death. Gregory's forensic accountant traced every dollar Natasha had spent in the year before my illness. The gambling was worse than we'd initially thought. She'd lost over $80,000 on online poker and sports betting sites. She'd taken cash advances on credit cards, borrowed from payday loan services at predatory interest rates, even pawned some of Kevin's inherited jewelry without his knowledge. Her personal trainer boyfriend, Blake, testified after being granted immunity. He was horrified to learn the truth about Natasha. She told him she was planning to come into money soon, that a family situation was going to resolve itself and they'd be able to run away together. Blake had assumed she meant a divorce settlement. When Maureen showed him the timeline of events and the evidence of Natasha's plan, he vomited in the parking lot of the investigator's office. "She talked about you like you were already gone," Blake said during his deposition, his voice shaking. "She'd say things like once my sister's situation is resolved or after my family obligation is handled. I thought she meant taking care of you while you were sick. God, I feel like an accessory to attempted murder." He wasn't charged with anything, he genuinely had no knowledge of Natasha's intent. But the guilt destroyed him. He closed his personal training business and moved back to his home state of Oregon, unable to face the community that now knew he'd been sleeping with a woman who'd plotted her sister's death. Kevin's testimony was the most difficult to watch. He sat on the stand, tears streaming down his face, as he recounted the moment he'd realized who he'd married. He described finding Natasha's planning notebook in her car after she'd moved out, pages filled with calculations, timelines, contingency plans. "She'd been meticulous, treating my murder like a business project with milestones and deliverables. She had it all mapped out," Kevin Bennett said, his voice breaking. Day 1, stop giving her the evening medication dose. Day 5, suggest to the doctor that maybe the antibiotics aren't working. Day 7, if she's still alive, move to Phase 2. Phase 2 was. He couldn't continue, covering his face with his hands. Gregory gently prompted him. "What was Phase 2, Mr. Bennett?" "Smothering her with a pillow during an afternoon nap when she was alone in the house. Making it look like she'd stopped breathing due to respiratory failure from the pneumonia. Calling 911 in hysterics. Playing the devastated sister who'd tried to save her." The courtroom had gone silent. Even Natasha's lawyer had looked shaken. Natasha herself sat stone-faced, refusing to show emotion, but I saw her hands trembling in her lap. The notebook Kevin described was entered as evidence. I couldn't look at it during the trial, but later, Gregory showed me copies. The handwriting was unmistakably Natasha's, the same loopy script she'd used to write me birthday cards and Christmas notes. But the content was monstrous. She'd drawn diagrams of my bedroom, noting where security cameras were positioned and where blind spots existed. She timed how long it took our parents to drive home from work. She'd made notes about pillow placement and how to position herself to use her body weight effectively. Most horrifying was her backup plan if the smothering was interrupted. She'd noted that she could accidentally give me an overdose of my pain medication, claimed she'd lost count of the pills, act distraught and confused. The plan had layers, contingencies, alternate routes to the same destination, my death, her financial gain. During the trial, Natasha's defense team tried to paint her as mentally ill, a woman suffering from depression and financial stress who'd had a psychological break. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that extreme debt could cause temporary psychosis, impaired judgment, intrusive thoughts that didn't reflect someone's true character. Gregory tore that argument apart. He presented evidence of Natasha's calculated behavior spanning years, not just the acute phase of planning my death. The incident with our aunt 7 years ago. The manipulation of Kevin's finances. The affair she'd maintained while pretending to be a devoted wife and mother. The careful research and documentation of her murder plan. None of that suggested temporary psychosis. It suggested a pattern of predatory behavior and a complete lack of empathy. Your Honor, Gregory had said during closing arguments, this was not a woman having a breakdown. This was a woman making a choice. She chose to research methods of murder. She chose to manipulate her sister's medical care. She chose to contact an insurance agent to discuss the payout before her sister was even dead. She chose to invite that agent into the house for the explicit purpose of planning the logistics of her sister's death and the subsequent financial benefit. Mental illness doesn't make you Google how long does smothering take. Premeditated intent does. The jury had been out for 6 hours. I'd sat in the courthouse cafeteria with my parents and Kevin, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. Every possible outcome ran through my mind. What if they didn't believe us? What if Natasha's tears and her lawyer's explanations convinced them she was just a troubled woman who'd never actually intended harm? When we were called back to the courtroom, my legs barely supported me. Thomas held my hand so tightly my fingers went numb. The jury foreman stood, an older man with kind eyes, and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judgment amount, $2.3 million. Natasha had gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed through the quiet courtroom. Her lawyer immediately began talking about appeals, about excessive damages, about financial hardship. But the judge was unmoved. He'd read the evidence. He'd seen the notebook, the browser history, the meticulous planning. He noted for the record that he believed the judgment was not only appropriate but potentially lenient given the severity of the attempted crime. The moment we walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in over a year. Not happy, exactly, but vindicated. Validated. The legal system had confirmed what I knew to be true: I was the victim, and Natasha was the predator. No amount of tears or excuses could change those facts. Natasha showed up to court looking like a victim. Designer clothes, perfect hair, tears at the ready. Her lawyer painted her as a stressed mother overwhelmed by financial pressure and worried sick about her sister. The questions to the insurance agent were just her trying to understand my benefits in case the worst happened. The Google searches were her trying to understand what I was going through medically. The conversation with the agent was taken out of context. Gregory destroyed her on the stand. He walked her through every search query, every deleted browser entry, every moment captured on camera. He had the insurance agent testify that her questions were specifically about accelerating payouts and what would trigger maximum benefits. He had Kevin testify about her confession and her complete lack of remorse. Then Gregory pulled out his ace. During discovery, we found that Natasha had tried to do this before. 7 years ago, to an elderly aunt who'd left her money in a will. The aunt had fallen down the stairs at a family gathering. Natasha had been the only one near her at the time. The aunt survived but changed her will, leaving everything to charity. No charges were filed, but the family had quietly distanced themselves from Natasha. I hadn't known about this. None of us had except our Uncle Charles, who testified with visible reluctance. The pattern of behavior was established. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found in my favor on all counts. The judgment was for $2.3 million. Natasha didn't have that kind of money, obviously. But her portion of the family trust did. Our grandmother had left money in a trust that would pay out when each grandchild turned 40. Natasha was 35. The court ordered her future trust distribution, estimated at approximately $2.5 million, to be placed in escrow and used to satisfy the judgment when she reached 40. Until then, 15% of her wages would be garnished to cover the interest and legal fees that continued to accrue. Additionally, my parents updated their will. Natasha was removed entirely. Her children would receive her portion in trust, managed by Kevin until they turned 25, but Natasha herself would never see a penny. Kevin's divorce was finalized. He got full custody, with Natasha receiving supervised visitation only. Her own sons were afraid of her after learning in age-appropriate terms that she'd tried to hurt their aunt. Kevin Bennett's parents, George and Rita, stepped in to help with the boys. They paid for therapy for Parker and Mason, helped Kevin afford a modest apartment, and provided the stability the twins desperately needed. George, a retired teacher, picked the boys up from school each day. Rita, who'd worked as a nurse, helped explain to them in gentle terms that their mother was sick in a way that doctors couldn't fix with medicine, that sometimes people's brains told them to do things that were very wrong. But I wasn't done. I kept the original life insurance policy active. Every month, I paid the premium. Natasha was still listed as beneficiary. My lawyer had advised me to change it, but I refused. I had other plans. I spent the next 2 years rebuilding my life. I met someone, a kind man named Thomas who worked as a veterinarian. We married quietly, just immediate family and close friends. Natasha wasn't invited. I started therapy to process the trauma of knowing my own sister had wanted me dead. I moved out of my parents' house into a condo downtown. And I started a foundation. The Natasha Bennett Foundation for Victims of Familial Financial Exploitation. It provided legal assistance, emergency housing, and counseling for people whose family members had attempted to harm them for financial gain. Every piece of press, every fundraiser, every grant application bore her name and detailed her crimes against me. Her Google results became a nightmare. Search Natasha Bennett and the first page was all articles about the foundation and what she'd done. Her LinkedIn profile became useless. She couldn't get a decent job because every employer who searched her name found the story. She tried changing her name legally, but we monitored for that and made sure to update all the foundation materials to include her aliases. She tried to sue me for defamation. The case was thrown out immediately. Everything we published was true and backed by court records. Her friends abandoned her. Her church asked her to leave. She'd moved to New Hampshire to start over, but somehow word always spread. We maintained a database of public court records that anyone could access, searchable by name. When potential employers, landlords, or community organizations searched for information about Natasha or her legal aliases, they found documented facts about the civil judgment against her. We never contacted anyone directly or encouraged harassment. We simply made public information easily accessible, which was entirely legal. Thomas and I had a daughter 3 years after we married. We named her Grace. On Grace's first birthday, I finally changed my life insurance beneficiary to Thomas and set up a trust for Grace. I sent Natasha a letter informing her of the change. I included a family photo, me, Thomas, Grace, and my parents at Grace's birthday party. Everyone smiling, healthy, alive. I wrote only one line, I won. Her response came a week later. A short email. You've destroyed my life over a conversation. I never actually hurt you. I replied with a list: attempted conspiracy to commit murder, intentional infliction of emotional distress, financial exploitation, documented pattern of predatory behavior toward vulnerable family members, and the fact that you still, after all this time, think the problem was getting caught rather than planning to kill your sister. She never responded again. My parents see the twins regularly. Kevin Bennett brings them over for Sunday dinners. Parker and Mason are thriving, active in sports and doing well in school. They know Natasha is their mother, but they call her by her first name now. They're anxious after visits with her, Kevin says, like they're waiting for her to do something unpredictable. Last I heard, Natasha was working at a call center under yet another name, living in a studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old car. The garnishment on her wages would continue until she turned 40, at which point her entire trust fund would be seized to pay the judgment. She'd be left with nothing at an age when most people were beginning to think about retirement planning. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. Then I remember lying in that bed, paralyzed, listening to my sister plot my death. I remember the clinical coldness in her voice, the casual way she discussed making it look natural. I remember the searches on her computer, the research into suffocation, the complete absence of remorse. Thomas thinks I should let it go, move on completely. But the foundation helps 3 to 5 families every month. Real people whose siblings tried to poison them for inheritance. Adult children whose parents forged documents to steal their disability benefits. Spouses who discovered life insurance policies they never signed. Every person we help is a victory. Every story we publish adds to the database of familial financial exploitation. Every legal precedent we set makes it harder for people like Natasha to get away with it. Grace is 5 now, bright and curious and full of life. She asks about Aunt Natasha sometimes. She's seen photos, heard the twins mention her. I tell Grace a simplified version: Aunt Natasha made some very bad choices and hurt people, so she's not part of our family anymore. When Grace is older, I'll tell her the whole truth. She deserves to know what her mother survived, what her aunt was capable of. My relationship with my parents is stronger than ever. Linda still tears up when she talks about arriving home that day, about what would have happened if she'd been 5 minutes later. Robert took early retirement to volunteer with the Foundation's Legal Advisory Board. Last month, I received an email from someone who'd found the Foundation website. Her brother had tried to stage a car accident to collect on her life insurance. She'd survived, reported it, but the police said they couldn't prove intent. She asked if we could help. I forwarded her information to Gregory. Within a week, we had her connected with a lawyer in her state, a therapist who specialized in trauma from family betrayal, and a safe place to stay while she built her case. The trial for her civil suit started yesterday. Early reports suggest she's going to win. I sent her a message: "You're going to be okay. You survived. Now make them pay for what they tried to do." She responded, "I will. Thank you for showing me how. Natasha tried to kill me for money. She failed. But in failing, she created something bigger than she could have imagined. A network of survivors who refuse to be silent. A foundation that won't let these crimes hide in family secrets. A legacy that will outlast both of us." My near-death experience lasted 3 days. Her punishment will last the rest of her life. People ask if I hate her. I don't. Hate requires caring, and I feel nothing when I think of Natasha except perhaps a distant pity. She destroyed her own life through her greed and callousness. I just made sure everyone knew about it. Grace asked me last week what the foundation does. I knelt down to her level and said, "We help people who were hurt by someone who was supposed to love them. We make sure they're safe and that the bad people face consequences." "Like superheroes?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Exactly like superheroes," I said. "But with lawyers." She grinned and ran off to play. Thomas wrapped his arm around me, kissed my temple. "You did good," he murmured. I looked around our living room. Photos on the walls, our wedding, Grace's birth, family gatherings full of people who genuinely loved each other. My parents and me. Kevin and the twins. Friends who'd stood by me through everything. A life rebuilt from the ashes of that fever dream where I lay paralyzed, listening to my death being planned. I survived. I won. And every day I wake up healthy and whole is another day Natasha doesn't get what she wanted. Sometimes revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just living well, helping others, and making sure the person who tried to destroy you has to watch you thrive from a distance they can never cross. I still have dreams sometimes. The footsteps in the hallway. The whisper, "Just make it look natural." The figure in the doorway. But in my dreams now, I can move. I sit up. I look her in the eye. And I say, "Not today. Not ever. You don't get to win." Then I wake up in my bedroom with Thomas beside me and Grace sleeping down the hall, and I remember that I already said those words in real life. And I meant every one of them.